This is Living Power with Dan Hurst.
So we're in Revelation, starting with chapter 6, starting with verse 1. We're going to look at the first few verses. This is the introduction of the four horsemen. And you've heard about that a lot. In fact, I think there's even a movie named that. But it certainly is something that we have to understand, and we need to understand what those four horsemen represented, because that's critical to understanding what happens in God's Magog. So let's take a look at the passage. Now I watched when the Lamb opened one of the seven seals, and I heard one of the four living creatures say with a voice like thunder, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a white horse, and its rider had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer. When he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come," and out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth, so that people should slay one another, and was given a great sword. When he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come," and I looked, and behold, a black horse, and its rider had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the four living creatures, saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and wine." When he opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed him. And they were given authority over a fourth of the earth to kill with sword, and with famine, and with pestilence, and by wild beasts of the earth. Now, today, we're going to start digging a little deeper into what is going to transpire as visualized by the Apostle John. Remember, John is, at this point, he is in heaven, and he's seeing this go on, and he's explaining it to the best of his ability. So what he's seeing is obviously being interpreted by his own personal experience and his human limitations. So we have to understand that he says this looked like, or this sounded like, or this seemed like, and then sometimes he says this is what it was. And you have to be very careful to pick up on those things. One of these, one by one, these seals are opened, revealing something that we need to understand concerning the transition from what was the church age to this transition into the end times, or what the prophet Joel called the great and awesome day of the Lord. Now, what happens now is that during this transition that we're looking at now is when, when the Antichrist takes over. This is when the Antichrist steps in and takes control. And it happens through what's called the Battle of Gog and Magog. That control is brought about by this epic battle, and it's referred to as Gog and Magog, although sometimes people will refer to it by other terms. It's not the Battle of Armageddon. It is a battle that happens before the 7-year period of time of tribulation. So this battle is in which these enemies of Israel attempt to destroy her is fought, it seems, in 2 phases. First of all, the first phase is something that is apparently triggered by Israel. The second one is the enemies themselves begin to attack Israel. And we'll take a look at those a little bit, piece by piece, as we go along. But in fact, the enemies are horribly defeated, both in the first phase and actually the second phase. They're really defeated. And that's what gives this Antichrist the opportunity to step in and negotiate a peace treaty with the enemies of Israel. So he signs this peace treaty on behalf of Israel. He gets Israel to agree to this peace treaty. And then that puts him in this incredible position of authority over the world, for that matter. And he will honor that peace treaty for 3.5 years. At the end of the first 3.5 years of the 7-year period, there will be peace. And although the rest of the world will still have a lot of chaos going on, a lot of it because they're still recovering from the Battle of Gog and Magog. But there will still be chaos in the world, but Israel will have peace. At the end of that 3.5-year mark, the Antichrist will break that covenant, and then there will be 3.5 years of absolute sheer hell on earth. Now, this is still speculation on my part, but I believe that the temple, some people say, well, when does the temple when will it be built? I think it'll be built in the first 3.5 years of the tribulation. And I think once it's completed and it's functional, ready to go, that's at that 3.5-year mark is when the Antichrist will step in and say, okay, everybody, you have to worship me. I read something very, very interesting just this morning about there is almost a movement going on right now in Israel saying, look, why can't we since we honor the same God as the Muslims, why can't we worship together? And so we could establish some sort of a temple on the Temple Mount, and part of it would be for Muslims and part of it would be for Jews. But we come from the same father, Abraham, which they do, and they say we worship the same God. You just worship him differently than we do. But that doesn't mean that it isn't the same God. So why can't we worship together in peace? Interesting, isn't that? Coming from Israel, of all places. And so this we're moving so fast toward that time, and what's going to happen is there's going to be this call for peace, and that's going to trigger this opportunity for the Antichrist to step in and say, okay, this is how we're going to do it. And he negotiates that peace, and he takes over. During the 7-year tribulation, there are a number of signs that prove that God is still in control during this time, even though the Antichrist is still in charge or ruling over the earth. These signs are given to us to prove that God is still in control. And the signs are identified as 7 seals, 7 trumpets, and 7 bowls. That's the way Revelation refers to them. And in the case of these 7 seals, the 7th seal opens up the 7 trumpets, and the 7th trumpet opens up the 7 bowls. And so the process goes along, and every time a seal or a trumpet or a bowl is opened, there is a new, it seems like even worse chaos that happens on the world. But it is, in fact, God trying to get man's attention. Every time, it's God trying to say, will you at least acknowledge me? Will you look to me? Will you respond to me? And man, again, refuses to respond to God and going his way and ignoring God. So, the 7 seals and 7 trumpets take place during the first half of the tribulation, and the 7 bowls take place in the second half of the tribulation. Now, this battle of God, I mentioned that it seems to take place in 2 phases. It is the first phase, which some Bible scholars refer to as the Great Middle East War, is a battle in which Israel may, in an effort to defend itself, launch a preemptive strike of some sort, possibly nuclear. And when Israel feels that that the line has been drawn, that there's a red line in the sand and they've crossed it, they will respond. They always have, and they will continue to do so. But at some point, Israel is going to realize or fear that they are in danger of annihilation. And so there will probably be some sort of preemptive strike on their part. And certainly it seems to happen in this Gog and Magog battle. So why would Israel feel so threatened? Well, because these attacking nations are so hell-bent on destroying Israel. I mean, they're claiming that over and over and over again. They want to destroy Israel. They're very open about it. In fact, Iran talks about it blatantly now. They call Israel the little Satan. They call the U.S. the big Satan, or the great Satan. And they're intent on destroying both of us. And they're going to do whatever they can to destroy, not just Iran, but all of these enemy nations of Israel are bent on destroying Israel and taking over its land. And the reason, they say, is because the land is theirs. They say that that Ishmael was there, that was his land, and that Israel, the Jews, are just occupying the land, that it's their land, and so they should have the right to have that land back. Joel Rosenberg, who is a noted Christian Jewish author and founder of the Joshua Fund, a consultant who actually has been a political consultant for many, many years. He made this case this week. Listen to it. I'm just quoting his words. Iran and the Islamic State are being driven by Islamic eschatology. Eschatology is the study of end times. And then he lists some things that they believe. He said they believe the end of days have arrived. They believe that the Islamic Messiah, known as Mahdi, will appear at any moment. They believe that when the Mahdi appears, he will rule the entire earth. They believe that Jesus will also return to earth, but not as the Messiah or Savior or Son of God, but as the deputy to the Mahdi. They believe that Jesus will force all Jews, Christians, and other so-called infidels to convert to Islam or be executed. They believe that the way to hasten the arrival and full establishment of the global Islamic kingdom, or caliphate as they call it, is to annihilate Jews and Christians, and specifically to annihilate Israel, which they call the little Satan in their eschatology, and the United States, which they call the great Satan. They believe the time is very short and that they must move decisively because soon each Muslim will face the Mahdi face to face and be brought into judgment if they have not faithfully followed the Mahdi's orders. They discuss such matters often, not in the shadows, but in the public. Yet Western leaders are not paying attention, much less carefully analyzing the implications of such beliefs. So, phase one of Gog and Magog is apparently Israel launching some sort of preemptive strike to defend itself. And that attack by Israel will be so devastating to its enemies that Israel will feel like they have finally accomplished something, some sort of peace, and will eventually, she'll let her guard down, which may take a period of years, I don't know. It may happen over a period of months, but at some point, they will feel like they've accomplished peace now. They have decimated their enemies' will to attack them, and they feel like they're living in peace now. And then their enemies will rise to take advantage of what the second phase of Battle of Gog and Magog refers to as a time of peace also. In that, Israel will feel like they're at peace, and so their enemies will say, okay, now we can attack it. But there's something different that happens at that point. That is when the Antichrist is ushered in to take control. So, I'm going to show you some scripture that backs all of this up as we go along, little by little. I hope it will become clear to you. Who are Gog and Magog and the other nations that the Bible refers to in this great battle? Well, let's look at what the prophet Ezekiel said about these nations. Son of man, set your face toward Gog of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshach and Tubal, and prophesy against him, and say, Thus says the Lord God, Behold, I am against you, O Gog, chief prince of Meshach and Tubal. And by the way, in the original, there's also a term that's used there that says he's the prince of Rosh, which could be Russia. And I will turn you about and put hooks into your jaws, and I will bring you out, and all your army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed in full armor, a great host, all of them with buckler and shield, wielding swords. Persia, Cush, and Put are with them, all of them with shield and helmet. Gomer and all his hordes. Beth Togarmah from the uttermost parts of the north with all his hordes. Many people are with you. Now, who are these nations? One thing that you will find is that almost every Bible scholar has a slightly differing opinion of what these current nations are, or what names should apply to these current nations. But I've got a map put together here, and I think this will kind of help designate and show it out. Let me point these things out to you here. This area here, if you assume what some of the translations, or not translations, but some of the original writings include the word Rosh, is Russia, then of course that would be up in this area here. This area is generally referred to as Magog. This is the old Soviet bloc, all the different nations from the old Soviet bloc. And God would be running, or in charge of basically all of this area here. He would be considered a leader, certainly a leader for Russia. And so there's Magog, there's Meshach and Tubal. I'm sorry, I said this is the bloc. This is the Soviet bloc that is represented here. This is Magog, which represents Russia. Meshach and Tubal represent this breakup of the Soviet bloc. But there's also some speculation that Meshach and Tubal could be, Meshach be a word from which we get the word Moscow, and Tubal being a word that we get the name for the city, Tobolsk. And that's a possibility. That's what some Bible scholars also believe, which would put these two places, if they're actually cities, back over in this area. Persia, of course, is Iran. In fact, it was the name of that area until a few years ago when Iran changed its name to Iran. Beth Togarmah would be Turkey. Gomer would be eastern bloc of Europe. Cush is Sudan, and Put is Libya. The reason we know that is when we follow those names and the history of those names, that's where it takes us. That's where it puts us. The people that were the people of Put, or the people of Cush, that's where they hailed from. So, as you look at all of these nations, obviously it's clear that they're surrounding Israel, and they're moving in on Israel. But now the question always comes up is, well, what about the other nations? What about those other nations that aren't included? Where does Saudi Arabia come in on this? Where does Egypt come in on this? And most specifically, where does the United States come in on this? Well, let's look at that. In Ezekiel 38, we're told that this second phase of the Battle of Gog and Magog will begin when there is peace in the land of Israel. Look at it. Ezekiel 38. Thus says the Lord God, on that day thoughts will come into your mind, and you will devise an evil scheme, and say, I will go up against the land of unwalled villages. I will fall upon the quiet people who dwell securely, all of them dwelling without walls and having no bars or gates, to seize spoil and carry off plunder, to turn your hand against the waste places that are inhabited, and the people who are gathered from the nations who have acquired livestock and goods and dwell at the center of the earth. Now, in order for these nations to attack Israel, what this passage says is that Israel is going to feel like they're at peace. They're going to feel secure. They're not going to be living behind walls and gates and obviously the metaphors there implying that they're living in peace, that they feel secure. They don't feel like they have to worry about much of anything. And so they're going to be, Israel certainly isn't there now. That's why I say there's a first phase where Israel does something, accomplishes something that makes them feel like they are finally at peace. And then these nations that are surrounding them, this coalition, decide, okay, now it's for our time to move. But something's changed. Notice what it says here. We see in this passage that the purpose of the attack this time is not to take over the land, as the radical Islamists would like to do now, but rather to seize spoil and carry off plunder. So they're not coming in to take over the land, they're coming in to take from the land and leave. That may be a reference to the wealth of oil and natural gas that has recently been discovered in Israel. They're just going to seize the oil and the natural gas and the wealth of Israel. So phase one of Gog and Magog will happen because Israel's enemies will seek to take over the land. But phase two will be an attempt to grab Israel's wealth. Now, I want you to notice verse 13. Sheba and Dedan. And by the way, the way it's actually pronounced is Sheba and Dedan. That's how you're supposed to say it, but we can't say it. We have to talk slower in America. So Sheba and Dedan. And the merchants of Tarshish and all its leaders will say to you, have you come to seize spoil? Have you assembled your hosts to carry off plunder, to carry away silver and gold, and take away livestock and goods, to seize great spoil? Now, I want you to see something. Tarshish was a merchant port at the mouth of the Mediterranean. Here's the mouth of the Mediterranean, and Tarshish was a port. That's Portugal, and that's Spain. And Tarshish was right there. And Tarshish was a biblical term, is a biblical term for the word west. And the merchants of Tarshish is a reference to the peoples of the west who engaged in trade. You've heard of the Phoenician merchants, the great shipbuilders and everything. Those were from Tarshish. Those were the merchants, considered the merchants of Tarshish. People who lived in the west, who moved out of the west, and they settled and they developed merchant trades and trade routes. And so they would go out and they would settle these merchant hubs, which became cities, which became lands, which became countries. And Tarshish became known as the westernmost land of merchants. That's what they were considered. When it talks about the merchants of Tarshish, it's talking about a lifestyle of trade, a lifestyle of exchanging merchandise, of selling, buying and selling merchandise. And so Tarshish, in fact, in Ezekiel, earlier in Ezekiel, in chapter 27, look at some of the explanations here. Tarshish did business with you because of your great wealth of every kind. Silver, iron, tin, and lead they exchanged for your wares. The men of Dedan traded with you. Many coastlands were your own special markets. They brought you in payment ivory tusks and ebony. Dedan traded with you in saddlecloths for riding. The traders of Sheba and Ramah traded with you. They exchanged for your wares the best of all kinds of spices and all precious stones and golds. The ships of Tarshish traveled for you with your merchandise, so you were filled and heavily laden with the heart of the sea, in the heart of the seas. So these merchants of Tarshish represented these lands, these nations, these countries that were basically capitalistic countries. Countries that exchanged merchandise, bought merchandise, sold merchandise, made merchandise, whatever. And that's what they were known for. So where would the westernmost lands of merchants be today from this area? It's not a trick question. About how far west can you go from the Mediterranean? What land, what country would you hit? North America. North America. And it's not just North America, but they would go from that mouth of the Mediterranean. They would ships would go north, and they would establish England. They would go south and establish all along the African coastline there. Eventually, Australia. They went around their cape to Australia. They established all of these nations, these countries that were basically countries that developed merchandise and traded in merchandise. They were merchants. They were the merchants of Tarshish. So this term is a reference to those kinds of nations that were basically capitalistic nations. It's not a condemnation. It's an explanation of how they lived their culture. And who are these lands of Sheba and Dedan? When we trace those names, we discover that they may well be lands of Arab descent that also engage in the industry of merchants of Tarshish. In other words, Arab countries that are also engaged in some sort of capitalistic economy. And look at their question to Gog and Magog and the nations that seek to attack Israel in Ezekiel 38. Look at that question. Hey, are you just doing this for the spoils? That's their question. Their question is this. Have you come to seize spoil? Is that what you're doing? Is that what this is all about? In other words, what this may be saying is that as long as these attacking nations weren't trying to take over the land of Israel, these other nations weren't going to get involved. And so it's possible, this is a theory, it's possible that what we may be seeing here is that if the United States can be counted among those merchants of Tarshish, that, and not only the United States, but countries like maybe Saudi Arabia, or even, I don't know how Egypt's going to play out in this, but we'll find out. But other nations, England is a good example, France is a good example. Nations that have basically capitalistic societies are just simply going to say, look, if this is about just the wealth and spoils and everything, we're not going to fight a battle over that. If you're not trying to come in and take away the land of Israel, then we're not going to get involved. And that would explain where these other nations are, why they're not getting involved, and because they just don't feel like it's their bad, something for them to get involved in. So we describe what will be happening on the earth at that time, and how this whole battle seems to be over political ideals and greed. But as we saw earlier, there is a greater issue at stake. This is a spiritual battle that plays out on the physical plane. And to understand that spiritual battle, we have to see what John saw in Revelation and what those things mean, especially for us today. For example, what do those four horsemen mean? What implications can we draw from that for us today? Well, let's take a look at that, starting with the opening of the seals. Now I watched when the Lamb opened one of the seven seals, and I heard one of the four living creatures say with a voice like thunder, "Come." Now what we see happening here is that Jesus is in charge of the signs and in charge of the timing. Completely in charge of that. In fact, John 5:22-23 says, "The Father judges no one, but has given all judgment to the Son, that all may honor the Son just as they honor the Father. Whoever does not honor the Son does not honor the Father who sent him." And the word for judgment there, the word that's used for judgment there, is the word for decision. In other words, it's saying the Father is not making the decisions, but has given all of the decisions to the Son. In other words, Jesus is the decision maker. Jesus is the one who is in charge of the signs and the timing. And so he begins to open these seals and say, this is what's going to happen. These are the signs and this is the timing. And the first four seals unleash the power of Satan on earth. And that's what we see. These four horsemen represent this incredible power of Satan, which is going to be manifested in the Antichrist eventually. But that's the power of Satan. And so the first one we see is the white horse. And we see the white horse represents a false peace. I looked and behold, a white horse, and its rider had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer. Now I want you to notice something. The first horse is a counterfeit Christ. Later on, we'll see Christ on a white horse. He's spoken of often. He's riding a white horse. And he comes in as a king. But this time, it's not Christ. It's a counterfeit Christ. Somebody who is introduced during Gog and Magog. And he has a bow. Now, he doesn't have... a bow is a symbol of military power. But it's not armor, and it's not a weapon. It's a symbol of power. It's a symbol of military power. So this counterfeit Christ is going to come in with a great deal of military power in his control. And notice that he will not have any arrows, which means he will come in peace. So he has a bow, but he has no arrows, saying he's just coming in peace. He has the authority, he has the power, he has the military power to back it up, but he's coming in peace. And notice this, he's crowned, but look at this. The crown is not earned or inherited, it's gifted to him. He has been given a crown. He didn't earn it, he didn't inherit it, but it's a gift, not inherited or earned. It will be a ruler that will be welcomed by the world regardless of his unearned position. In other words, it's not going to be somebody who comes in and proves to be some great military leader and he's led incredible battles and all the world is just looking at him going, oh my goodness, it's like Alexander the Great. It's just amazing. It's not going to be that kind of person at all. It's going to be somebody that the world will say, this guy's got it together. It doesn't matter that he's not a military leader. We can trust this guy. And the world is going to basically give him a crown and let him serve as a king regardless of his unearned position. And the world will welcome this ruler who can put an end to nuclear weapons and environmental economic problems and poverty and so forth and so on. Yet I want you to know that God will reveal how fake this Antichrist is by heaping overwhelming problems on the earth. Once the Antichrist is in place, it's one that everybody thinks is going to be able to solve all the world's problems. The problems get worse. And so the world is going to accelerate into massive chaos under the leadership of the Antichrist, who supposedly is the one who can bring peace and solve all the problems of the world. And at some point, the world is just finally going to say, what's going on here? Then, so that was the white horse, representing false peace. Then there was the red horse, who represents war. When he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, come. And out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace away from the earth, or take peace from the earth, so that people should slay one another. He was given a great sword. A large sword is a weapon of war. It represents that weapon of war. And it means that whoever this is, this power of Satan, will have power to take peace from the earth. Supposedly to bring peace to the earth, but also to take peace from the earth. Power to make men fight each other. Now, the question comes up once in a while, is red significant? Some theologians believe so, and some suggest that it may be a reference to Russia. I don't know. I don't get into those kind of little games, but it doesn't really matter to me. But I think it's important to understand that the Antichrist's phony peace plan will fail. And because it will fail, remember the white horse represents this peace, and so it'll be a false peace. And because that peace fails, then the Antichrist, this red horse, is introduced, the war. And this will prompt this Antichrist, or this power of Satan, to begin taking extreme measures to take control, and probably control over the world economy in an attempt to maintain loyalty by the disadvantaged in particular. So the peace isn't going to work, so there will be war then to take control, which introduces the black horse. The black horse represents economic collapse. When he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, come. And I looked, and behold, a black horse, and its rider had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, a quart of wheat for a denarius, 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and wine. The pair of scales is significant because it represents the world economic crisis because of food shortages. There's going to be incredible famine in the world at that time. There's going to be food shortages. We already are seeing that, but this will even be to a massive scale. And a quart of wheat is going to cost a day's wages. But to maintain the loyalty of the rich, this is interesting. This is how this whole thing plays out. To maintain the loyalty of the rich, the Antichrist is going to protect the oil and wine, which represents the things of wealth. And so the Antichrist is going to protect the wealthy, and but yet at the same time not be able to solve any problems. So now the world economy will be the criteria for ushering in more control for the Antichrist. Now, the world economy now dominates almost every business in the world. Even in my own little business, I sit at home in a dark booth all day long and talk to myself, and people pay me for that. But even my business is dominated by the world economy. I have clients all over the world. And if the world economy is in trouble, then I'm in trouble. Little old business guy in Lee Summit, Missouri. So the world economy is really starting to dominate every business in the world, either directly or indirectly. And that's already starting to happen. So what happens when the world economy starts falling apart? Well, we're introduced to the pale horse, and the pale horse represents death. When he opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and its rider whose name was Death, and Hades followed him, and they were given authority over a fourth of the earth to kill with sword, and with famine, and with pestilence, and by wild beasts of the earth. Now, the amazing thing to me is, why would they want to do that? Control. They start doing that for control, because none of the other things are working. The false peace didn't work. The military might didn't work. Controlling the world economy didn't work. So now the way you take control is by killing people. The word pale is the word chloros. It's kind of a word for where we get it for chlorophyll. It's a pale green, a sickly looking green. And the natural follow-up to false peace, followed by war, followed by economic collapse and famine, is to just start killing people. I mean, that's how you control them. And so that's why we see death followed by hell. It is the power to kill by the sword, by famine, by plagues, and by wild beasts. The word for wild beast is therion, and it means dangerous animals. We don't know if that's a reference to actual animals or if it's a reference to some other type of weapon of some sort. We don't know. But it's interesting that it says all of this massive chaos is controlled. It's controlled by this Antichrist. And over a fourth of the earth will be killed. That's over 1.5 billion people will be killed. That's how he takes control. Now, here's the question that you have to ask yourself in all of this. Where will you be in all of this? Where will you be? I believe that Christians will have been raptured by this point. I think it's very clear. I think that's what the Bible is teaching, and I think that's the pattern, and that's what allows all of this to really unleash itself in the earth, that the Holy Spirit, the power of the church has been removed. And by the way, from this point on, we never hear the church mentioned in Revelation again. It's not referred to. Even though it was referred to in the first 2 chapters of the 7 churches. So I think the church is gone. I think it all happens. But where will you be? I want to point something out as we start closing this down. Think about this. The Bible says that in the end times it will be as in the days of Noah. Jesus said that. And that there will be all kinds of festivities. People will be laughing and drinking and carrying on, and not a care in the world, and no interest in the things of the Lord. And then the rains came, and they were destroyed. But what happened to Noah? Noah was protected because he obeyed the Lord. Then there was a time when Lot had actually disobeyed and ended up over in Sodom and Gomorrah and started getting involved in some of the things that were going on there. And God said he was going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And he told him, send an angel, and the angel led them out, got them out. What happened? The whole area was destroyed. What happened to Lot? He was protected. He was protected. God will always protect his own unless he has a specific plan for their death. So where will you be in all of this? You will be protected. Unless there is a specific reason or plan for your death. So it's important for us to understand that as we get into these end times, if this is where we are now, if that's the timing, the way it's supposed to work, that you are protected. God has his hand upon your life. And even though there's chaos all around you, even though your world may be falling apart sometimes, understand that God knows. He has his hand on you. He's protecting you during this time. I love what Psalm 91, verses 1 through 4 says. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. Just stop right there. Don't read anymore. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. You need to make a commitment in your life that you are going to dwell in the shelter of the Most High. In other words, you're going to fellowship with him. Shelter means that you are in his presence. You are living with him. You are in his world. You are where he is. And you have decided, you made the choice, I'm going to dwell in the shelter of the Most High. Because when I'm dwelling in the shelter of the Most High, I'm basking in the shadow of the Almighty. In other words, he surrounds me. He surrounds me. And I will say to the Lord, my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. For he will deliver you from the snare of the fowler and from the deadly pestilence. He will cover you with his pinions, and under his wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness is a shield and buckler. Yeah, we're living, I think, in the end times. They're perilous times, dangerous times. Our world is in real serious trouble. But you're not. As a believer, as a Christian, you're protected. When you dwell in the shelter of the Almighty, you bask in the shadow of God himself. You bask in his presence. He's above you, around you, before you, behind you. You're okay. And because you're okay, that doesn't mean that you can just kind of sit around and watch the world go by. You have a job to do. You have responsibilities. Why is God protecting you? Because he has something for you to do. Why would he protect you unless he didn't care? Unless he didn't have a reason? Why are you here? Why are you here now? Because God has something he wants to accomplish in and through your life now. Discover it and watch what God does. Let's pray.
On behalf of Dan Hurst and the Open Class, we want to thank you for watching. We hope it was a blessing.